Hello everyone, welcome to this new video in which we will discuss what you should do with your defined, your undefined and your open centers. So you've probably already learned that there are 3 ways in which your centers in your Human Design Bodygraph can show up. There is defined, undefined and open. Defined means that it's colored in, and it depends on which program you use to create your chart, but it definitely will have some sort of color in it. And this is the only one that has masculine access to energy. Then we have the undefined and the open ones. These are the ones that are not colored in, and the difference between undefined and open is that undefined will have at least one gate activated in the center, while none of the gates in the center are building a full channel. So there can be 1, there can be 12 activated gates in the center, but still there is no other gate on the other side in another center which builds a full channel, so this center remains undefined. Then we have the open ones. These are very easily to detect. These are the ones that have no gate activated in the center at all, so it's completely blank. The undefined and the open ones differ, but their general access to energy is in the feminine way. Just to make that clear, right in the beginning of the video, you can already dissect and understand a lot about the dynamic of a center by just looking at the definition. By being masculine, I mean that in the most foundational way you can imagine. So the energy is coming from you, going outwards. When we talk about the feminine access to energy, the energy coming from the outside entering your system. So you're passive and receiving energy from the outside. I think this picture helps to see that it's not that in the centers that are undefined or open, you don't have energy. Of course you have energy, but it's more the source and the access to that energy that is defined by the definition. If you want to have a quick overview over the centers, I have my first human design video linked in the video description where I go through all the centers very briefly. I think at one point I will talk about all the centers in depth, but at the beginning it's sufficient enough to just look at the overall themes of the centers when you look at the definition. So let's first talk about the defined centers. I want you to imagine them like constant streams of energy that are created somewhere in yourself, in your system, and that are constantly flowing outwards. So if you imagine I'm a body graph and then I have the different centers. For example, if I have a defined G center, which is the identity, the center of self, I will have my sense of self, so to say, the energy about identity, and then it depends, of course, which channel defines my G center. It's flowing outwards all the time, and it's flowing outwards in that exact frequency that I'm used to, so to say. So my first important point about defined centers is that you somehow have a kind of responsibility, because imagine that, like, visually imagine that you are constantly putting energy in the world. And you might know that by now, the energy that you are putting out from a certain center, when you are defined in this one, will be perceived by other people when they're undefined or open. So that means other people and the world is influenced about the quality, so to say, of your defined center. So you have a responsibility to be aware what kind of energy you're putting out. For example, with the emotional solar plexus center, we can't necessarily control with which kind of emotion we are influencing other people, but we can of course influence if we are over dramatic, not reflected, so we perpetuate a bad feeling, for example. If we suppress our emotions, so they come out in weird and destructive ways. I mean, there are 1,000 ways to deal with our emotions in a, I would say, wrong way. Compare this to someone who feels sad, feels angry, feels resentment, feels joy and happiness, but in a natural and healthy way of allowing the emotion, really seeing and acknowledging that emotion, being accountable for their own emotion. And for example, when they're super angry, they're super triggered, they don't go into like a family meeting and let their anger destruct other people's energy systems. Maybe if someone with a defined solar plexus center feels angry, they should go in the forest and butt their head against a tree, or hug a tree, or cry, or scream, or dance, or shake, or do whatever they need to naturally release the tense energy that is in their body. Same with the Ajna center. If you have an Ajna center, you are literally influencing other people's thoughts by the way you are thinking. And I have an open one, so I can clearly say, please think good thoughts. Please be careful of your beliefs and be careful of your destructive thinking patterns, because you are, even if you don't share them with other people, you are sharing them energetically all the time. So the first information that I need you to understand, you need to have a responsibility, and that's also something that gives you safety, because you can, I think control is not the right word, but you can leverage, you can use, you can refine, you can adjust your defined energy. And you should, because it's influencing the world and other people. And this gives you a sense of control and impact. Another thing with defined centers I want to emphasize in this video is that with defined centers, when we talk about the conditioning, so the coping strategies that we learned during our upbringing to feel loved and safe and survive, with our defined centers, we tend to have the conditioning of being too much. So imagine a child having constant physical needs, for example. So they have a defined spleen and they know exactly what they need physically. They are very much in tune with their body and they are not accepting anything else. For example, some sensory, but also some health issues where children are just not compromising on their bodies, for example. Or this is a more vivid example, or you have a generator child that has a defined sacral center, which means they have energy all the time. They are little powerhouses that always need to run and use their sacral energy. And imagine such a child having parents with either the spleen or the sacral center undefined or open. For them, a child with a very strong urge to move and to use their energy, this is too much. They can't keep up, so they don't have the actual energy. And I mean, children usually have more energy than adults. They can't keep up with them, and they also feel pressured, and maybe they have themselves a theme of not being enough. We talk about that later when we talk about the undefined and open centers, but not feeling enough in that center, so they feel shame that they don't have the same access to sacred energy, for example. Or if they have an undefined spleen or open spleen, they feel like, why are they so stubborn about their body, their health, their sensory, their neurological things? Yeah, because they can't comprehend, they don't have the actual experience of always knowing their body, of always knowing what they need physically. And they also don't have the actual experience of having so much energy and the pressure of relieving it and the pain and the negative effects that come from suppressing that sacred energy. So that child will learn that in order to feel loved and accepted and seen by their parents, they need to suppress that energy that would normally, naturally flow out of the children. So main conditioning on defined centers is being too much. More examples, a defined throat center might be a child that keeps on talking, and can't stop talking. And people are annoyed that they always need to talk or sing or use their voice in a loud way, for example. Or a defined root center, children that need competition or deadlines or somehow pressure to release their adrenaline and their root pressure. What we then have is, and this is the deconditioning step I want to propose to you in this video, if you, for example, if you are a sacred being, so a manifesting generator or a generator, which means you have a constant access to sacral life force energy, sexual energy, power to create. But you had parents or an environment in which you felt your energy, your power is too much. The deconditioning process would be to unlearn that thought, unlearn that coping mechanism, and especially, or more precisely, unlearn the strategy to suppress your intimate need to create from your powerhouse, from your sacral center. So you need to let go of constriction there. You need to let go of concepts, how you should do, you should, and invite your sacral center to express itself the way it wants and needs to be expressed. Because with defined centers, it's not like, I have this gun, this is my sacral center, I use it when my brain decides, okay, I want to shoot now. No. It's not that you have really control over it. It's more like you need to allow the energy that is created within you to find its way outwards without hindering it, basically. So it's a big process of allowing. And even if we say defined centers are masculine, the interesting thing is that somehow a big part of being responsible of your defined energy is actually allowing it to flow outside you the way it wants to flow out, and not the way you think. Because whenever we think about our energy and we want to do whatever we think we need to let it flow, we are not letting it flow. And the practical, this is very theoretical. Obviously, this is also a thought construct that I'm delivering you through language, which is already so mental. But practically, that means creating space so you can actually watch and learn and see your energy, how it flows out, how it wants to flow out. You can't channel it consciously if you had a long process of observation. If you know the taste, the structure, the dynamic of the energy. But first, you need to watch. You can read and listen to stuff on YouTube and learn about it. But as long as it is a mental construct, a mental pattern, a mental thesis, it's mental and it's not the actual energy. So the practical step would be create space and observe. And only when you've learned how the energy works, you can start to, for example, set triggers, positive triggers to channel that energy, to manipulate it somehow. But this is secondary. And why is it secondary? Because you will not be able to control it. You will need to understand it. And then at some points there are like little things you can adjust. But it's less than you might think. When we talk about the undefined and open centers, we're talking about centers in which the access to energy is feminine, more feminine, which means the energy is not, it's not like we don't have that energy in our life, because this would not work. It's more like that we are perceiving the energy from the world, from the space, from other people, and we are living it outside in. So for example, if you have an undefined or open self center, the G center here, your sense of identity is not something that is influencing the room, influencing others, and starts within yourself. Identity is more so something that is fluid, that you receive from the outside. For example, characters from fiction, actors, celebrities, but also friends, teachers, your parents. It's more like your identity is fluid and you receive the inspiration and the energy of different identities from the outside world. So there is this big misconception, which I find very funny, that people think if they have not so many defined centers, they lack energy somehow. But as I perceive it, you actually have more when you are open or undefined in a center, because you have not only one type of energy that you are constantly, or like more probably, but for example, if you have a center that is defined through one channel, you will have this energy your whole life. And by that I mean literally all the time. It's like you have a filter of pink color through which you see the world all the time. All the time. And that influences your perspective, right? It makes you biased. But if you're undefined or open, you have blue, green, violet, again blue, then yellow energy in this field, in the center, because you are receiving the energy from the outside, and you can receive so much more. You can live and experiment and live multiple versions, for example, of identity. This is natural, and this is how undefined and open centers work. But the first thing I want to emphasize in this video for the undefined or open centers is that you need to be aware, and you need to learn, and you need to differentiate what energy is yours and what is just an influence from the outside. And I already said you can, for example, be influenced and inspired by other people's identity. But at the same time, there is a small but very crucial difference. Being inspired is not the same than being unconsciously hijacked by another energy. For example, if I have an open or undefined solar plexus center, I might feel very angry without being actually angry, just because someone is next to me who is angry. If I then yell at my partner, for example, this would be not good. Because of course, if we are able to receive other people's energy, it does not mean that we mismatch them as ours and act on them. Because, for example, in this example, a person next to me is angry, I get super angry because of my openness, and then I yell at my partner. This is destructive, because I yell at my partner because I'm unconscious about the feeling that the other person gave me. And I probably think that I will solve my emotion, or I will let go of that emotion if I let it out. But I can't, because the root of this emotion is not in me. So I probably yell at my partner, he gets upset, this person's still angry, I don't know what happened, and I created a mess. The conscious and advanced, and I know this is difficult, and I'm telling you this not because I mastered it, but because I'm a devoted student to that practice. It's more about being there, this person is angry, being angry as well, or being aware of the anger that flows into my system, letting go, being able to see that this is not my feeling, not being influenced by it, not act on it, not trying to solve it in myself or try to solve it in the other person, just observe. And through the observation, you learn. You gain the emotional intelligence, you gain the knowledge, the wisdom. You are a witness, basically. And by witnessing and being aware and maybe staying 100% in your persona, in your line, but talking to the person about the anger and being very helpful, because you actually exactly know how they feel without them needing you to tell. So you need to differentiate, because you still, for example, you still have your own feelings. So it's not like you only have feelings from the other people. No, you still have your own feelings, of course. Of course, you're human. But on top of that, you have the power of receiving the energy from the outside. So the number one super important tip for undefined and open centers is learn the ability to differentiate between your energy and other people's energy. And let other people's energy be other people's energy. Be aware, observe, learn from it, gain wisdom out of it. Don't act on it. Be a witness. The main conditioning on undefined and open centers is the feeling of being not enough. If you are undefined or open in a center which is highly defined, I mean that most of the people have defined, or if you have a very defined chart. For example, in my chart, I have 6 of 9 centers that are defined and 3 undefined ones, and 2 of them are completely open. And it's super weird for me because I'm used to having that defined energy. Most of my chart is defined, so that openness irritates me. The feeling of lack. So if you see other people having constant access to that energy and you observe yourself and you see you don't have it, projectors and manifestors, but mostly projectors and reflectors have that with the sacral center, where they feel they just don't have that much energy like other people to create or to build or to whatever. Know that it's meant to be that way. You are not lacking. As I said, actually you are able to have more experience, more knowledge and more wisdom in your undefined or open ones. And you, of course, also, as I already mentioned, you have your own energy in that center as well, but it's not that prominent, it's not constant, and it's more subtle, because in these areas of your life, you are destined and designed to see. We need people that are open and undefined in certain areas of life to guide the others. That's why projectors are such good guides, because most of the things we do out of sacred center, and projectors don't have the sacred center defined by definition, which means they can see where our blockages are in our energy life force area. They can see because they are not biased so much. That's why they don't have access to that energy from themselves so much, because this energy, this definition, as I already said, is like a bias. I can give, this is my personal biggest example, and maybe you can apply that to your undefined or open centers if you struggle with one. My biggest struggle was my open heart, open ego center, because I have a very defined sacral center, so I have a lot of power, I have a lot of energy to do things, and I'm very used, as I already said, to have defined energy. But in the area of self-worth and willpower and ego, it was open. That led to a feeling of never feeling enough. And I think like the ego center is for most people undefined or open, only because of the probability of having this defined, because it has not so many gates, for example, as the sacral center or the throat center or the other ones. A lot of people feel like they are not enough. They are not worthy of the good things in life. And it's so interesting to observe my partner and my sister. They both have it defined, to see people who do not have a question about their worthiness. That is so interesting for me to watch. And the solution for me in this case, and I think it applies to all the centers, is to just, and here it's mental, to just mentally know that you are worthy, for example, or that your emotions are enough, or that the way you think is good enough, or the way you express identity is enough. You just state it as a fact. And someone once said to me, you will never feel worthy, but you are. And when you accept that, you don't need to feel like the center is defined, like worthy or having a strong identity or whatever. You just state it as a fact. You accept it as a fact, even though you are not aware of it. Even though you don't have the physical experience of it, or the emotional one, or whatever. If you don't, I must imagine a child being born and being worthy the way I was born, and I was just worthy, even though I can't feel it. And because the biggest mistake you can do with an open or undefined center is trying to do whatever to get that feeling. So what was I doing? I was working my ass off to finally at some point feel worthy. But it's so much better to do just what I want, using my sacral energy, probably not feeling worthy while doing it, but still knowing that I am. It makes you free of trying to get a feeling that you are not designed to have all the time. Sometimes, to see clearly, we need to be open. And that's the beauty of it. And by trying to fix that, by doing so much work, for example, and trying to put energy into that center, this is just, then you are circling in yourself, and you're not bringing yourself forward, and you're not bringing the world forward. This was my video on defined or undefined and open centers. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm super curious to hear about your thoughts, your questions in the comments. I'm so down to answering questions if you have some. I wish you a beautiful day or night whenever you're watching. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe, leave a like if you like this video, and we'll see each other in the next one.